Welcome everybody to today's Community College Careers event. I'll be introducing the panelists here in a second, but first I wanted to just say thank you to a couple of people. First of all, Tim August, who was the Career Development Officer for the English Department in the fall and really worked with Liz to start to plan this. And then especially thanks to Liz, who did the lion's share of the organizational work for today. So thank you, Liz. It is great to have this wonderful partnership between English and women's gender and sexuality studies, because together we can do good things. So thanks, Liz. So today we have three panelists, all PhDs or a student in the doctoral program from Stony Brook. And they're here to talk to us about their experiences both on the job market and what they know from being at a community college. About what kind of applicants community colleges are interested in. I think they'll also talk a little bit about their careers and what the career looks like. So we're really grateful to our three panelists for taking time out of their day to be with us here today. And I will introduce them. First of all, we have Michael Boscherer, who was a Stony Brook PhD student from 2002 to 2007. He focused on Shakespeare performance and the supernatural during his time with us. In 2007, he was hired by Suffolk Community College, Riverhead campus, and he has served and continues to serve SCCC's Eastern Campus as first campus honors coordinator, then chair of humanities, and now as chair of humanities and social sciences. He's also the founder and editor in chief of the peer-reviewed journal, This Rough Magic. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Our other second speaker is Megan C. Fox, who is Associate Professor of English and Director of Recruitment for the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies option at LaGuardia Community College, CUNY. She teaches literature, writing, and liberal arts courses, and she is a faculty mentor to the staff of the college's student newspaper, The Bridge. Her research interests include modernism, metamodernism, and feminist and queer theory, and her work is published in Wolf Editing, Editing Wolf, The Space Between Literature and Culture, and MFS Modern Fiction Studies. She also serves on the board for the Feminist Intermodernist Association. And I also have to just speak my pride and say Megan was my student. So it gives me so much pleasure to have her here with us today. Thank you for being here, Megan.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
And then our third speaker today, our third panelist, is Stephen Pallas, who many in the audience will know. Stephen is nearing the completion of his PhD in English literature at Stony Brook. He has been an adjunct instructor at Suffolk County Community College since 2014. He also recently accepted a marketing position in a company specializing in artificial intelligence solutions for small and large businesses. So congratulations and thanks for being here, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
And now I will hand things over to Liz Montegari. Liz, as many of you know, is Associate Professor and Grad Program Director for the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program. I knew I was going to get that wrong at some point today, so thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Celia, and you have been crucial. As many of you might recall, this event was initially scheduled for almost a year ago, and we ended up canceling and rescheduling due to the pandemic that was upon us and continues to wreak havoc in our lives. And as Tim and I were kind of reinvigorating the event, we got connected with Megan, and I'm really excited about how this whole event has come together. And I want to just thank the panelists. I was saying this to them while some of you were hanging out in the waiting room. I have emailed them way too many times in the short amount of time that I've known them, and yet they have still shown up and are still incredibly generous, super flexible, and I couldn't be more grateful. So what we decided to do for today is to kind of run things as a little bit of a roundtable of sorts. So I have a few questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists, and they'll each have a chance to respond with some short answers. And this will carry us through for probably the first half of our session. And then we'll open things up into a more general Q&A. But if questions come up as things are happening, feel feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll come back to them as we move along. But to kick things off, I know Celia just gave really great professional short bios of each of you, but I wanted to give you a chance to tell us a little bit more in depth about your research, your teaching, your current position, anything else we should know about who you are and what you're working on right now. So maybe we'll just go in the same order that Celia just went, which I think is alphabetical. So Michael, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. Well, as Celia said, I was at Stony Brook from 2002 to 2007, and I was focusing on Shakespeare and continue to focus on Shakespeare. I was always interested in terms of how it would have been performed at the time, and so that sort of pulled me more towards the supernatural aspect of it, because my idea was that if you really wanted to see what the stage was capable of, looking at the characters who used as much technology as possible was really sort of the way in. So that's sort of how I got started in the project. It was a nice project because it allowed me the opportunity to look at a variety of different things. You could look at the play text, you could look at the architecture, you could look at the religion and the supernatural aspects of it. But the other thing that I really enjoyed about it was I could teach it, and I could teach it well. I mean, it really was a great way into having conversations with students. So it was something that I found interesting, but it was also something that they found interesting as well. And so that was my research. I continued to give talks and write papers on it since graduating, and really sort of use a good percentage of it in a variety of different types of classes that I've taught, both when I was at Stony Brook and now that I'm at the college. It works well in composition courses, depending upon what you're doing, certainly literature courses. So that's more or less my professional academic angle. Did you want me to talk a little bit about my career at Suffolk, or is that for later? It's up to you.
Oh, we can hold that for the moment.
That's
and I think
fine.
that can be integrated into the
Yeah.
next question.
All right, then I'm good. I'm good.
All right, perfect. Megan, you're up.
Hi, everyone. So my training is in British and American modernism and feminist and queer theory. And my research focuses primarily on representations of queer subjectivity in mixed genre modernist texts. And I was particularly interested, and still am, in this relationship between form and representational strategies and how hybridity is deployed in order to achieve that. I'm still working in that same sort of vein, but also interested in liminality. I don't get to teach a lot of modernism. I won't ever teach at LaGuardia a course specifically in modernism, but I do get to teach feminist and queer theory. I do get to teach some modernist texts in my lit classes. I've also had an opportunity to teach at the Graduate Center. That's one of the opportunities, and maybe I'll talk about that more later on, but that's one of the opportunities that's available in CUNY. I teach a lot of composition courses, and it's pretty flexible in terms of how you want to teach it and the text that you want to teach. I teach liberal arts courses, I teach journalism courses, I teach lit courses, and I teach women's and gender studies courses. So I get to do a whole lot of things, and that's pretty great. My position is associate professor. I do not yet have tenure. I will go up for tenure. This is my 5th year there, so I'll go up for tenure at the start of my 7th year. LaGuardia is one of the few campuses that allows for early promotion pre-tenure, which is pretty nice. I'm the director of recruitment for our WGS program, which I can talk about more later. I'm also the program director of the journalism option and the liaison to the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. We have an educational partnership with them, so I get to plan lecture series each year. I'll stop there.
That's great, thank you. Stephen.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Those of you that know me know that I'm a man who wears many hats, and as Professor Marshik's introduction to what I'm doing these days will tell you that I'm always involved in a ton of different projects. I would say that my research right now, in terms of my literary research, focuses on empathy at the turn of the 19th century. I focus on British Romanticism and applications of empathy in sort of like democratic movements for, say, the abolition of slavery, prison reform, women's rights, and environmental rights. So that's really like the bulk of my research. I will say that I've found some interesting ways to tie that into not only literary teaching, but also in terms of composition teaching, which I think that if you can figure out ways to do that and provide some versatility to your instruction, that will be good for, for the job hunt. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I'm also, for all of anybody who's in graduate school knows it's incredibly difficult to sort of like maintain a work-life balance and also to, provide a financial stability for yourselves, right? So to be able to, have a full-time job outside of your graduate studies, to be able to work on your coursework or your dissertation, and then also to be sort of on the job market is something that is like having 3 full-time jobs at once, right? I should say though that if you can, I tend to be super, super ambitious when it comes to my professional development. So I've done everything I can to sort of like pursue fellowships. I've won a couple of fellowships here at Stony Brook to pursue jobs outside of academia that you can apply your skill set to. You'd probably be surprised. I've found it not easy, but not as difficult as I thought it would be to find things in like writing and editing jobs, because there are a lot of companies that would prefer to hire people with skill sets that you all possess, as opposed to hiring people that have like a more linear professional sort of like resume that they can tailor to, right? So if you're a little bit concerned about that, if you've not applied to jobs because of that, I would say that try anyway, right? Because you might find some forward-thinking CEOs or hiring managers that are willing to give you a job, and that's something that I found in my with this current marketing job. I have no marketing experience, but the CEO was like, "Hey, I like that you're academic and that you have writing and editing skills and things like that. So we'll train you to do marketing. So don't worry about that." Yeah, I think that's about answer to the first question anyway.
Thanks, Stephen. And I think we'll circle back to some of what you were saying there, and kind of we can tease some of that out. So, the first question was kind of about what you're up to now, what your larger research and teaching interests are, and kind of your current position. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about how what was kind of the path that ended up as you've landed in your particular positions. You're all at different moments in your career and have been at your different places or haven't even arrived there yet, right? In some cases. So kind of to tell us your story, your trajectory, but feel free to not just feel limited to talking about the formal institution you work for. Celia's bios of all of you made it clear that you're involved in professional associations, you're involved in editorial boards of journals. So tell us your story. We'll mix up the order. Megan, you wanna kick things off this time?
Sure. So I defended in August of 2014. That year, Celia encouraged me not to apply for jobs, which I think was really good advice at the time because of where I was in terms of completing my dissertation, and I really wanted to finish then. And I mean, I had been applying for fellowships and such in like the previous year, and that stuff takes a lot of time and can also take away time from actually getting your writing done. And that was definitely something that was happening for me. So sort of putting the job market aside temporarily was actually a really good decision. So I had adjunct work lined up for the fall after I graduated. I was adjuncting at Queens College, so one of the CUNY 4-year colleges. I adjuncted there for 2 years, and I was applying for jobs and also looking at other adjunct work. So I also started adjuncting at NYU's Gallatin program, where I got to teach a WGS class, which was really awesome. I'm really glad that I had both of those experiences. I think teaching at a CUNY campus positioned me to be able to get the job that I have now, and also having taught, so I also advised a master's level student while I was at Gallatin too, and having those experiences I think also enabled me to later be able to teach at the Graduate Center. So I'm grateful for those experiences. I do remember it being really hard to go from feeling like you're at the top of your game when you graduate to then being an adjunct. And I was literally in the basement. My office was in the basement of Queens College. So it felt really metaphorical about being back at the bottom again. But it did help me in terms of my trajectory. I went up for early promotion in my third year. That's something that's available to folks. I think now it's been moved to the fourth year, but if you have published and you have good teaching evaluations and good peer evaluations and have done a lot of service, then it positions you to be able to go up for early promotion, which comes with a pay increase generally, and you get moved to a different pay scale. So within CUNY, there's kind of a set pay scale because we're unionized. You can look all of that up if you wanted to find out how much I make. But that's been a great thing for me. It's also positioned me in a really secure place for when I go up for tenure. I have been able to, I mean, we're required to publish, but I've still been active in terms of my own research. I present regularly at conferences, at least pre-pandemic. I'm associated with, I've planned conferences and seminars. I'm part of the Feminist Intermodernist Association. I'm on the board there and have worked to put together a national conference and another one that was supposed to happen that's been postponed now for another year. So I'm still really active. It's a life that sometimes feels tangential to my teaching, but I also have other colleagues who are still pretty active in terms of their own publishing. So as I said, you have to publish, but the requirement is certainly less than, say, at an R1. I guess I'll stop there.
That's great, thanks. Stephen, why don't you jump in here?
Sure, yeah. I received my master's degree at the University of Arizona in 13. I took a year off of school before starting at Stony Brook, the PhD program in the fall of 2015. But I started adjuncting at Suffolk in 2014. First at the Grant campus, which, if you don't know, is in Brentwood. And then about, I think, 2 years later, Michael took me on at the Eastern campus, and I've been at the Eastern campus since, I think that's since about 2016. And I've been there continuously since then. I think that the adjuncting experience has been, a lot of people knock the adjuncting experience as being, fraught with, insecurity. And I think that there is a lot of that, of course, right? Especially, in a semester like this, where I don't have any classes at Suffolk. Actually, this semester I had one, and then due to low enrollment, I had that class was taken away. So you have to deal with all of that insecurity as it comes along, right? But I would say that more often than not, my experiences adjuncting have been extremely positive. My pathway there was pretty simple. I had very good training at the University of Arizona, but then as an adjunct, I've met a lot of good people. I've been able to develop and sharpen my skills as a community college instructor, not just a university instructor, which I think is really helpful. I would say that it's a really weird place to be, because I feel like I'm still sort of in the oven cooking, right? Because my degree is not finished, and I'm adjuncting, and I have all of these sort of tenuous positions that I'm in right now, which is, makes life kind of complicated. The other thing that complicated my pathway there, and, we all have our personal things that sort of get in the way. When I started the PhD program at Stony Brook, my first son, I have two, my first son was a month from his due date. he had hydrocephalus and he needed neurosurgery when he was 2 weeks old. We found out a little bit later that he was born profoundly deaf. So there were a lot of like personal challenges in terms of my own experience. And I only really bring that up to say that, like, we all have these things that we kind of go through, right? But it is possible, I think, to find your own pathway there. And that opened the door for me to sort of like learn a lot about myself and the kinds of things that I wanted to do, what I wanted to get out of the PhD, what kinds of things I wanted to research, and even really like what it means to be human, right? So in a lot of ways, I think that turned out to be a relatively positive experience, even though it was a very difficult way to start my PhD journey, right? Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Michael, tell us about your trajectory.
So I got my master's degree at the University of Connecticut, and the nice part of that program was that it allowed you to teach in the program as you were getting your master's. So when I came to Stony Brook, I had teaching experience. When I came to Long Island, I had teaching experience, and I fell in with some really wonderful advisors. My first real advisor, though, was Ben Robinson. And when I first got to the island, I was like, hey, what can I do in order to sort of supplement my stipend here at the university? He's like, well, there's a community college on the island. Maybe you can get a job with them. So I started adjuncting at Suffolk immediately, really. They hired me as soon as I really got to the island because I had the teaching experience from UConn. And I also started off at the Brentwood campus as an adjunct and taught there for a number of years. And then I taught at the Ammerman campus and sort of bounced back and forth between the two places. I taught a lot of different courses as an adjunct. I was happy to try new things, and I know that helped me in the classes that I taught at Stony Brook, but also I know that helped me on the job market when I applied to a variety of different places. I was offered a number of one-year positions at Suffolk, probably closer to the third and fourth years that I was teaching there. They were one-year writing instructor positions with the option of maybe becoming tenure track. And I was offered this 3 times, and each time I was offered it, I thought really long and hard about it, because based on what I was making and based on where I was living, I didn't really have a lot. And ultimately I said no to their offers each time, only because I was scared that if I took their offer, I would never finish my degree. And this is something else I talked to Ben Robinson about. I have to say, if you can get a chance to talk to Ben, talk to him, because he's wonderful. But in any event, I sort of did that. And then I got to the point in my own dissertation where I was more or less done writing it around the end of year 4. I could have certainly defended at the end of year 4. But again, Ben and Cliff Huffman, who was one of my other dissertation advisors, basically told me, they're like, you know what, go on the job market and see what you can do, right? And if you can get a job, then you defend. And if you can't get a job, then don't defend, right? And I was able to score a 5th year of funding at the university from a program called the Learning Communities program, which I don't know if it's still at the university, but it was a really good program where it basically taught junior doctors and nurses of America to write. And so I went on the job market tentatively at the end of my 4th year to sort of see what I could get. Didn't really get much of anything. And then in terms of interviews or anything of that nature. And then by like year 4.5, I continued to apply. And then I got a number of interviews. I think I probably sent out something like 100 applications or 150 applications or something insane like that. And, got back, 10 promising interviews. And Suffolk was one of them. And so I always liked teaching at Suffolk as an adjunct. And I kind of figured, like, well, it would be really nice to get the job at Suffolk if I could get it, but they'll never take me now because I've already said no to them 3 times, right? So now that I'm finally in a position to say yes, they'll probably say no, right? but happily, they did say yes. I was hired at the Eastern Campus in Riverhead. I had interviews actually at the same time at Riverhead, at Ammerman, and at the Grant Campus. And I worked my way up in the process of all three of them, and Riverhead snagged me first, which I think really is to my benefit, because I've had a good career there. So I started my career there as just simply teaching as many classes as I could. And I think one of the reasons why I think that they ultimately took me was because I had the teaching experience as an adjunct. While I was an adjunct, I taught as many different types of courses as I possibly could. I taught developmental, I taught composition, I taught British literature, I taught the American literature, I taught the media class, I taught for the acquired brain injury program. I really went out of my way to be as flexible as humanly possible, because I like teaching, number one, but at the same time, there were certainly semesters where it was hard to get a teaching assignment. And so what I was always amazed at, and what I'm still amazed at, is that some instructors they'll turn their noses up at an assignment because they think it's beneath them. I don't think that helps you, because I think your arrogance, creates these ripples that go well beyond that one conversation. So you can always gain something from whatever it is you happen to be teaching. So I think that the college certainly liked that, but I think that they also liked the fact that while I was a grad student at Stony Brook, I was trying to get involved in as many different types of things as I could. I ran the graduate conference 2 years running. Initially, when I got hold of the conference, we'd had it at the university, and we decided when I got hold of it, we would take it to Manhattan, and that sort of worked out well. And so I had experience at conferences, I had experience giving papers, I had experience with some publications, I had experience, running the conference at Stony Brook. So all those things sort of, I think played a role in terms of why I was initially hired, because the college looks at it in this way. Teaching is your primary function at the college, followed by service, followed by research. That's not to say that research isn't important, because you can't teach if you don't research, but at the same time, it's those first two things that really matter. And sort of to piggyback on what I've already said in terms of my own research, I wanted to make sure that the things that I was doing were useful, at least useful to me, right? So I wanted to make sure that I could teach at everything that I was sort of researching. And I was telling this to Stephen maybe the other day. I was at one conference where it was a great conference. I was sitting in a panel, and this one guy was giving a paper on tulip imagery in Shakespeare. And it was, well written and well researched, the whole 9 yards. But I was sitting there thinking, like, how could I teach this? Who would want to be in one of my classes and hear about this? And I was like, nobody, really, in the grand scheme. Like, I couldn't teach this in a writing class. Couldn't, at least at the undergraduate level, I really couldn't do that. So Suffolk, I think saw those things and saw that they were useful, and then it was more or less just I taught for the first 3 years, 4 years, something like that, and then I was asked to be the honors coordinator at my campus, which I was happy to do, because I saw it as an extension of my teaching. I saw the program as an extension of my teaching, in the sense that I wanted to see the program go in a certain direction. It wasn't going in a certain direction. And so at the very least, I could have an impact in terms of where the program went. And because I had an impact on where the program went at my own campus, I had an impact on where the program went college-wide. So I took on that job for a year. And based on what I had built in that year, I was asked to run for the chair of the humanities department at the Eastern Campus. And at the time, humanities department at the Eastern Campus had about 12 different disciplines that sort of tied into the job. And because it is the smaller of the three campuses at Suffolk Community College, there's no traditional like one English department or one foreign language department or something like that. So humanities encompasses about 12 different disciplines. And then just recently, over the last year and a half, I guess 2 years, I've taken on the responsibility of the social sciences department as well. So pre-pandemic, with all of that sort of happening, I have about 15 full-time professors. I have 15 full-time professors who report to me. I have anywhere, depending upon the semester, I have anywhere from 50 to 85 adjunct instructors reporting to me. I have approximately 18 to 20 disciplines reporting to me. And I also oversee the hiring at the Writing Center too, and work in tandem with our Writing Center coordinator. So that's sort of my professional trajectory. But I've always been interested in taking on things that I thought were useful, because I've always wanted to simply just be useful. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. And you did a great job kind of anticipating the next round of questions, where I wanted to ask things kind of a little more targeted about where you're at. So I'm going to circle back around and maybe tease out some of what you were saying about chairing a department. But first, I'm going to swing back to Stephen. And Stephen, I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk a little bit about the practicalities of adjuncting while a graduate student. How did this work out with the teaching assistantship you had at Stony Brook? How did you make initial contact with the campus where you first started teaching? This is one of the questions I often get from students. How do you get an adjunct position, basically?
Yeah, I think I like that you use the word practical, because I think that a lot of graduate students are advised that it is distracting and impractical to pursue something like adjuncting. And in fact, I think that depending on what institution you're going to, there are some contractual issues with Stony Brook. I didn't have any trouble with this, but I know some other people that did, where there is some paperwork, that needs to get done. There needs to be some approval to be able to teach at certain institutions. I think if they're SUNY schools. But in any event, it's pretty much like any other job search. I pursued adjuncting positions at Suffolk initially. I knew that's where I wanted to adjunct. But I do find that by and large, it has taught me a lot while pursuing the adjuncting at Suffolk about the job market, the larger job market, pursuing full-time jobs, right? And the other benefit really is that, I've networked with a lot of people at Suffolk. So if you like being on Long Island, if you think you might want to teach at Suffolk on a longer term basis, right? It's a good way to meet people and to get them to know you as a teacher, as a colleague, right? So I think that, the process of becoming an adjunct wasn't terribly difficult. And I think that the process, like I said, I've been doing it continuously since 2014, and it has supplemented really well my graduate studies, my continued training as an instructor, my own professional development. I got the advanced certificate in teaching writing that the writing program offers, and so that I learned a lot from that program while I was adjuncting, while I was sharpening my skills as an adjunct. So that was sort of like my pathway there. But I think that by and large, it's been a really worthwhile experience for me to be doing both things simultaneously. I think that might answer your question.
That's really helpful. I'm going to ask one follow-up, which is, when you got your first position, were you answering a job call, or did you reach out to the department chair? Did you have a contact who kind of hooked you up? What literally did you do?
Literally, I did not have any contacts there. I reached out to there wasn't a job ad that I saw. I reached out to the various campuses to see if they needed adjuncts at the time, and I think I got I forget what's her name, Karen. The whoever was the chair at
Karen Dovell.
Karen Dovell. Thank you. Yeah, Karen Dovell. She was very kind to answer my email, to answer any questions that I might have. So I met with her. We had a really nice conversation for about an hour, and then she ultimately said, well, based on my training at Arizona and the writing program, that she would give me some classes and try me out that way.
Great, thanks. That is how I have secured adjuncting positions for myself in the past. So I'm glad to know that is still good advice to be putting out, that cold calling is not a bad idea at all. Megan, I am super excited that you're here, WGSS certificate student, and there's a lot of WGSS students on the call. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what is, I think it's a relatively new position you're in, the Director of Recruitment for Women's and Gender Studies is at WGS. Tell us a little bit about what's happening there, what's program building look like, where you're at now.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the first thing that I will say is just that having the WGS, or are you still calling it WAGs?
WAGs, WIGs, WGSS, we're very flexible.
Okay. Well, having the certificate has been immensely helpful. And it not only enabled me to get certain adjunct work, but it allowed me to become involved with the WGS program at my campus, and only folks who have a WGS graduate certificate are able to teach in the program. So other folks who are publishing in that same area, that's not enough in terms of credentials, so that WGS graduate certificate does go a long way. Our program is very new. They were still pushing it through when I got to LaGuardia. This is maybe the third year or the 2.5 years into the program being official and to running the courses. It's still super new. A lot of the programs on our campus are relatively small, and so a lot of work has to go into program building. So in pre-pandemic times, that also meant that I would go to the academic fairs at the start of every semester when new students came in to talk about what it means to get a WGS degree. At LaGuardia, it's housed within liberal arts, so it's called an option. We have an articulation agreement with Hunter College, which means that all of the credits that students earn at LaGuardia will transfer. Periodically, we've had faculty from Hunter College come and talk to students. It means that we also put on different events throughout the year to make our presence on campus known, to recruit specific classes, especially first-year seminar students, because a lot of students arrive to campus having perhaps selected a major or just selected liberal arts, like generally speaking, but don't yet know what they want to focus upon, or students selected a major, but they're not necessarily settled on that major. So there's still a lot of room for making students aware not only that the option exists, but that it's a great program with a clear pathway to a BS, and that they can also, that there are career options afterwards. So some of recruitment also entails, talking to students about what they can do with this degree after they finish at Hunter. It has also meant that not only am I doing recruitment at these particular events at the beginning of semesters, or holding events that are getting students from different first-year classes to come, but it's also meant that I've targeted students who are in these like early college programs. So they're still high school students, but they're taking college courses. So speaking with them, making them aware of our program and what it entails. I've created flyers and pamphlets with different targeted audiences to promote the program. I'm also working with the Associate Director of Recruitment at the college, who has information in terms of like students who've accepted or who have been accepted to the college but haven't yet decided which CUNY campus they want to go to. And so we can also reach out to those students individually to add that personal touch and to let them know about our program, to have that contact with a faculty member. So it's a lot of different efforts, but it's also really rewarding to be able to teach in the program. And we've got some great students that are moving through. And so it's been it's hard work to build a program, and we're still in this sort of tenuous place since it's still quite small, but it's also really rewarding work.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So Michael, let me swing back to you. And, I think one of the things that we don't always think about when we're grad students, and maybe we don't always totally recognize even when we're in full-time teaching positions, is the amount of administrative work that comes along with being a faculty person. So it's, even in just your story you were telling, you were talking about kind of chairing different programs and developing. So I was just wondering if you could talk about the particularities of the administrative work you're doing on your campus, but also kind of more generally about how has your kind of training in the field of English prepared you to be overseeing, what was it, 18 to 20 disciplines? I don't know if I have the numbers right. So I kind of have a general and a more specific question for you.
Well, I guess I'll start with how my training has helped in these administrative capacities. I think if you're going to be a good administrator, you have to be a good student, because you have to study the problem in front of you. And if that's, helping to grow a program, then what's the problem with the program? Get the context of the program and see what you can do to sort of work with others. Because those are more or less your resources, right? In terms of the administrative responsibilities, when I was honors coordinator, I worked in tandem with the chair people to basically get a sense of what we could realistically run, what the students needed, and then I would go off and sort of sell the classes to the students and sell the classes to the instructors. When I became chairperson, I would say it was a natural extension of those things, because I don't necessarily think you can be a good administrator if you're not a good instructor, and I also don't think you can be a good administrator if you don't teach, because you have to know your clientele and you have to have an understanding of where they want to go and what they need. So I think they work really quite hand in hand. But in terms of the administrative angles with regards to the job, is that what you're looking for me to talk more about?
Just giving you an opportunity if you want to say anything more specific about your role in the chairing position. And I am intrigued by the juggling of humanities and social sciences.
So, my job responsibilities as chairperson, building the master schedule, working with full-time and part-time faculty to sort of help them with regards to course development, working with regards to promotion, tenure, things of that nature, working with upper administration, dean of faculty, executive dean, and also working with my counterparts from the other two campuses to sort of build and grow programs college-wide. And that entails, meetings, observations, all of the above. In terms of how I sort of fell in with humanities and social sciences, it seemed like a natural progression to sort of attach the two together, only because I think if you're teaching English, you can certainly teach it in a variety of different ways. I've always taught English with a new historicist bend, right? So I'm sort of picking and, from different places, certainly. So I think my colleagues saw that I sometimes had a more social science bend towards how I would teach my English classes. And I think that helped in terms of sort of marrying the two different departments together, happily enough.
That's great, thanks. So I actually have two more questions left, but I'm going to ask one now, and then we can open up to the Q&A, and I'll reserve my last question. I'll retain my power as MC, and that's how we'll close out. But my last question that I'll do before we open up the floor, I wanted to know, what should folks who are applying for jobs at community colleges keep in mind? Or put another way, what makes for an attractive candidate? Megan, I'll call on you.
Sure. So I've been on a search committee, so I've also seen the other side of that. Okay, some of the advice I'm going to give you have already heard, but I will probably try to make that advice a little bit more granular. That first one being to make sure you tailor your materials, because that's the first thing that the committee is going to look at. And that doesn't just mean rearranging paragraphs. And it doesn't just mean.
Great. You're right.
Yeah. And it doesn't just mean adding in the name of the school and maybe like a sentence at the end. If it's a community college, then teaching is the priority. And that really needs to come through in your document. Your research paragraph is going to get a lot smaller. Your service paragraph is going to get bigger. Show that you know about the school. Show your commitment to teaching. That should come through in all of your documents. Show in those documents too your knowledge of the school and how your teaching would reflect accommodating the student population, for instance, at the school. I think adjuncting at a community college before you apply for a community college job at some schools is essential. I know that I didn't even get an interview for a lectureship at a different community college in CUNY after I had my PhD, because I didn't have adjunct experience at a community college. I had adjunct experience in CUNY, but not at a community college. So some schools will look at that and determine whether or not you seem like an ideal candidate. Your materials will also say a lot about whether or not you seem like this is really the job that you want and whether or not you're going to stick around, or if this is just like a stopping point to your next ideal job position after it. So I think all of that stuff really comes through in materials. It also comes through in interviews. So make sure that you do as much homework as possible before you go to that interview. I also prepped a whole lot, lots of mock interviews. I came with extra job materials that I circulated to the search committee that included materials that they didn't ask for. Like, I don't remember it right now whether or not I needed a teaching statement, but I know that I included a teaching statement in the supplementary materials that I left the committee with at the interview. I also provided some sample assignments and a few other things, maybe some syllabi, I think. So I think I'll stop there.
Can I give you a follow-up, Megan? And this comes from Ethan in the chat, who is just asking, could you say a little more when you say tailor to the school? You did mention specifically kind of knowing who the student population is. What are the other kind of characteristics? What is it about the school that you want to be figuring out when you're doing your homework?
If you can have a sense not only of like who the students are, what kind of classes you might be expected to teach, how you would teach, if you know how, how things are organized, stuff about the school, stuff about the mission statement in the school or for the school. Check out their website, check out the department website, look at what people are doing, have a sense of other things that are happening on campus, other initiatives. I looked at some like student publications before coming to campus. I looked at stuff that other faculty were doing. Just do as much research as possible. You might not be able to use all of that, but you might. Also, just having a sense too of where community colleges are in like a larger national landscape. President Obama was in the office, and I also was able to talk about Jill Biden's work when I was in my interview, and I think it was not something that I was consciously thinking about, but I had just been doing a lot of like reading around community colleges before I went on my interview. And I think all of that helps. So also just being aware of like current publishing trends too as well.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Michael, you want to jump in here? I was seeing lots of agreement.
I agree with everything she said. I have to say, Megan gives great advice, and I think the only thing that I could really add to that, if you're looking to get a job as an adjunct, I think the best thing you can do is to go willing to talk to that chairperson with an idea of how you're going to teach a particular course. Get involved in that conversation, because quite honestly, if some adjuncts that I have hired have tons of experience and some have no experience. But the question I always ask is, so how would you teach this class? What would you do? If you had your way, you've got 15 weeks, what would you do? And I always give the course description to the candidate, like, here, take a moment, look at this course description. This is what we're looking for. How would you teach this class? And be willing to get involved in that type of conversation. I think I know I've chaired, in the last 5 years, I've chaired 15 different full-time searches at the college. And so all of the advice that Megan gives is really very good advice. I will say that, just to sort of piggyback on something else that she said, with regards to Suffolk has 3 different campuses, and each campus has its own personality. And if you're looking to get a job at one of them, you should probably understand the personality of that campus, long before you get there. So that's one thing to certainly keep in mind. I think another thing to keep in mind is to stay within your time limit. If the committee tells you that you have an hour, then you have an hour, you don't have an hour and a half. And if you go in and only talk for 20 minutes, the committee is going to be like, but you have 40 more minutes, like, what are you doing with yourself? So you should work within the rubric that the committee gives you, and know that the process with regards to that interview for the full-time jobs is multifaceted. There's usually one interview with the larger committee, and then if you're successful in that, you're brought back for a teaching demonstration, and you are always given a rubric to follow in terms of what we want you to teach and how long we want you to teach it for. And successful candidates listen to those guidelines. And they're also willing to talk about pedagogically why they taught what they taught and how they taught it after the fact. So you have to be prepared for those things too. And then I think you just simply have to be available. You can't be hard to find. And you also, you just have to sort of be engaged in the process. That would be what I would add to all the great things that Megan said.
Great, thank you. And Stephen, do you want to jump in here? I know I don't think you've been on the side of the hiring committee, but what have you gotten really good advice that you want to share, or things you've noticed along the way?
I got some excellent advice actually from Michael yesterday, but a lot of that echoes what Megan and Michael just said about the job market. One thing I did do, and I think Michael mentioned this too, but I reached out to the chair of a job that I applied to this week at Connecticut, at Manchester Community College. They have an opening for an English instructor. So when he was generous enough to call me yesterday. So I had a really nice, about 45-minute phone call with him. But one of the things that I got out of that conversation was that the Connecticut community colleges are consolidating. So Manchester Community College is going to be consolidating with the rest of the 12 community colleges in Connecticut, and they're consolidating. So they have this draft proposal about changes that they're making across the state at the community college level. What was interesting about that is not necessarily the details, but that I think that most candidates who didn't talk to this particular chair aren't going to know that this draft even exists, right? And so again, the thing that I think that it's so awkward, or feels so awkward, to like reach out to chairs of departments and be like, hey, can I talk to you about this job that you have? And I do this with almost every job that I've applied to. I usually don't get a response, but sometimes I do, right? But that really helps you do your due diligence in terms of getting your research done for applying to these jobs, right? And I think that a lot of people are really generous with their time. And like I said, I spoke with this professor for about 45 minutes yesterday. He was like, make sure you include this in your letter because the job ad says this, but what we're really looking for is this other thing, right? So even though it does really feel awkward, it can be super fruitful in terms of gathering material for researching your what you want to write in your letter for the job.
Yeah, it's great. Great point. Great point. Thank you. So I know that Ethan has taken advantage of the chat. I don't think I've seen any other comments hop in there. I'm going to switch to gallery view so I can see folks. You can use the virtual hand raise. You can raise your actual hand or signal otherwise. Folks want to hear more on any of these fronts. Brooke, I see your hand.
Hi, so my name is Brooke Franks. I do adjunct at the Eastern Campus for Suffolk in the history department. When I moved to New York from Texas, I had some adjunct experience. So I've been able to teach there since the spring of 2019, and I love it. Next year will be my 4th year of the program, which means I will be running out of funding after that. And I have completed my WGSS certificate. I am considering starting to apply to other community colleges, maybe to try to teach with the Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies certificate, or just pick up a couple extra classes, maybe for the next year when I know that my funding will run out. Does it look bad to teach at multiple community colleges? Like you're somehow not staying loyal or anything like that?
No, it doesn't look bad.
Okay.
I think that if you have a good administrator, right? A good administrator will know that the adjunct population is varied and it's also deep, right? And the vast majority of the people that we have working for us in order to make ends meet are working at so many different places. There are also administrators who don't see that, and on some level, I think that this is sort of a marriage between the both of you in the sense that you're looking for a good fit for yourself just as much as they're looking for a good fit for you. And you will run into people who are not good administrators, and that should be a warning sign to you that that might not necessarily be a good institution to continue working at or even to apply to full time. I mean, I understand that the quest is always to get the full-time job, but if you have an administrator that you're working with as an adjunct and that administrator doesn't necessarily understand the fact that you're sort of, you're working at a variety of different places or holds that against you, then I don't know if that's necessarily, a place that you want to work, as a full-time instructor, long term, because we all start off as adjuncts. And if they can't understand that, then you have to ask yourself, well, how much support am I going to get in whatever area I need support in later on down the line? That would be how I would answer that. I don't know what Megan or Stephen think.
Thank you.
I would agree with what Michael just said. Yeah, absolutely. When we're looking at folks, we understand that people are piecing together work just in order to make ends meet. So I don't think that looks bad at all. And in fact, it can give you a more diverse teaching portfolio, more diverse experience, and also just show your own teaching versatility. So I think that, I don't think there are any issues with that. I can tell you right now that our program is small enough that if you were thinking about reaching out to LaGuardia, there wouldn't be any space. But I would say look at some of the programs that have been around longer that might be larger and in need of contingent labor adjunct work right now. But yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any disadvantage to adjuncting at a couple of different places.
Okay, thank y'all so much.
Jeff, you've had your hand up. What do you got?
Yes, thank you so much. I just want to say thanks to all of you, Megan, Stephen, and Michael for for talking with us about community colleges. my question has more to do with some experiences I've had with both former graduate students. Megan, two of my colleagues from graduate school, Stafford Gregoire and Linda Chandler, are your colleagues.
Linda's my chair.
Is she your chair?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I know for a fact, because they talked about this when they were in graduate school, that for them, there was no question that they wanted to teach at a community college. Rather, even though they had invitations to apply to four-year research universities. So for them, hands down, teaching at LaGuardia College was their first choice. I've also had former graduate students. One of those is Francisco Delgado and also Christina Lamb, who teach at Borough of Manhattan Community College. I've been in touch with them, and they tell me that they absolutely love. Let me just say this: that their satisfaction and their sense of fulfillment in teaching at a community college is much higher than it would be teaching at a four-year research university, and that is true. I think overall, when you look at job satisfaction amongst faculty who teach at community colleges, it tends to be much higher than it is for faculty who teach at, well, I'll just say, teach at a place like Stony Brook. Now, I know that there are various reasons. I know that for both Linda and Stafford, who are your colleagues, Megan, that it was important for them to be in New York City, right? Because they were born here and they grew up here, and so they wanted to come home, so to speak. But also, it's the case that they wanted to teach in an institution that has a high degree of diversity, right? And so I think what I understand is that for many faculty who teach at community colleges, that the reason why they're so happy with their work is because it's important for them to be around that diversity, right? Diversity not only in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of gender and also in terms of class. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that, right? That this is one of the advantages to teaching at a community college is because of the high degree of diversity.
Sure, absolutely. That's definitely something that I love most about my job. My students are really interesting people with diverse life experiences, and they bring that to bear on the classroom experience. So, you know, if we're talking about, I don't know, a work of literature or theory, students are often able to make direct connections to lived experience, to things that they've encountered. It's also something that is reflected in their writing, in our composition courses, in lit classes, in WGS classes. So that's that's a great asset of the job. It's nice to walk into a classroom and not see everybody looks like me. And it definitely opens your eyes to different experiences than ones that maybe you had growing up. My students do not have the undergrad experience that I had. A lot of my students work part-time, some work full-time, some have families, some left school for a while and came back. But for many of our students, getting this associate degree isn't just like a check mark, but it's actually a means for upward mobility, and it helps these students to, find jobs, to get a better paycheck, to be able to help out their families. And so it's really meaningful. Not that teaching elsewhere wouldn't be, but I think that for a lot of students, being able to have this education is really important to them on a number of different levels. It's definitely been a great experience to be at a place that's this diverse. It's more diverse than Stony Brook is. LaGuardia might be one of the most diverse colleges in the nation. And we have students coming from, all 5 boroughs, Long Island, but a lot of those students were born in other countries, or at least many of them were. So as I said, they're really interesting people, and we get to see a lot of that in the classroom.
If I could second that just for a moment, I wanted to say that adjuncting at Suffolk, there is also, you might not think that this is true, but Suffolk has a very diverse population as well. Maybe not as diverse as LaGuardia College does, but definitely more diverse than I was expecting. I've had a lot of students in developmental writing and freshman composition who are, retired Army veterans, folks from, Latin American countries, right? But just a lot of people who are looking to make a better living for themselves, and it is a very rewarding way to teach, right? A very rewarding population to teach, I think, in a way that I think that I've personally enjoyed more. It's made me more satisfied as an instructor to teach at the community college than perhaps at the university level. The other thing I should say about diversity is that I have noticed over the last, I've been on the job market essentially for 3 or 4 years now, and diversity and equity issues are super big in job advertisements in such a way that you need to be able to demonstrate that you're, tailoring your pedagogy to diverse students.
Thanks. That was a great question, Jeff. Thank you. Philip, I see your hand, but there's also just a question from Desi in the chat that I like, that it kind of distills a lot of what we've been talking about. And Desi's question is, okay, so have I got this right? I'm paraphrasing here. Best practices to get into community college teaching, especially if we're thinking from adjunct to full-time to even administrative kind of roles. Key pieces here are going to be taking the initiative to do kind of cold contacting of chairs and trying to make initial contact, but also networking, reaching out, talking to other folks. Does that sound like a good recap of what we've been discussing?
I would agree with that. The only thing I would add to that would be that you have to be flexible, and you have to be, I don't know, just willing to try to see yourself in these different roles. I didn't necessarily go out of my way to pick up the role that I currently have. Usually sometimes it's usually people who come to you and say, oh, I could see you in this role. And you're like, really? You really could? And I think you have to be open to that. But you have to be flexible in terms of how you're working with others, and even how you're even working inside your own classes. I think there's a huge benefit to assessing and reassessing what you're currently doing. It makes you better in the classroom, but I think it makes you a better colleague. And I think that if you continually do that, people see it for what it is. And I think that is, in and of itself, is a great calling card.
I would also say look for jobs in multiple places. CUNY also advertises all of their jobs on like the main CUNY page. And so don't just look at the JIL, look at various places.
What's the JIL?
The MLA job information list.
Just making sure we're all caught up. Thanks. All right, Philip.
Thank you all so much. So I've been teaching 9 classes a year since I've been ABD, actually before I went ABD. So I'm used to teaching a lot while working on other things. And I felt for a while that community colleges are probably the best fit for me personally. But as you know, there's usually just not that much information out there. So I really appreciate this wholeheartedly to everyone involved in today and who organized this. I have a few different questions. I have to leave in 10 minutes, so I'm gonna just say all of these at once, and you don't have to respond to any of them. Okay, so I have been talking with people who are tenured community college professors for a little while, and I've been told from some people to downplay research or to not even mention it, that some of these positions are so teaching heavy that some schools don't like the idea that you would want to do research or that you're anticipating it. And I don't know if this is more of a California thing, because I was looking more so out there, but I was told at one point to, even if I had conference presentations, to consider not even including those. So I was interested to hear that today, that research is still a part of it. And I'm curious if you folks have different takes on that. The other few questions I had is how to stand out for community college jobs. I do feel like you started to answer that a lot. The stuff about tailoring was really helpful. That I have good teaching reviews, but I don't have much beyond that. Like, I have good evaluations from my students and I have good reviews from the faculty. Sometimes when I adjunct at places, they don't always want to give me a letter. I think just because it's more work. I have good reviews. But I'm beyond the point where I can get a teaching award at Stony Brook. So I'm just trying to think of like other ways to stand out on paper. A third question is if you were applying to 4-year schools and community college jobs, did you have different letters for community college jobs? I imagine that you would. And I was curious how you sort of asked those people what to write, or what to write differently, or maybe it wasn't your committee, maybe it was someone more that you were working with. And then the final question is just very selfish and a little bit off the mark, but I think it was Stephen who said that he was picking up writing and editing jobs. I also try to find those. I just don't know where to look for them, if you wanted to share that. But like I said, thank you very much. If you can tackle any of those questions, I'd appreciate it. I realize it's a lot.
All right, I'll try to tackle. Just let me know if I'm missing the mark. So I would say research is important, and I don't think you should hide it by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think it goes back to tailoring your particular research towards whatever school you're applying to, right? I know that when we're looking through job applications in the search committee, we're looking at what people are doing, but at the same time, we're also looking at, how that research gels with the mission statement of the college, and even, the personality of the actual department itself. And so the question becomes, will this person be happy here? Will this person stay with us? Or are they simply just using us as like a stepping stone for a year and then sort of moving on, right? So again, you can't teach, and you can't teach well if you don't research. So I would never try to hide it. But I would tailor your cover letter, and I would tailor your CV in such a way to sort of go back to what Megan had said, towards that particular institution. And in the actual cover letter, say, okay, I've done all this research, but I know that it's teaching heavy in this particular department, and this is how I've taught it. This is how I sort of pull this, information in to a writing class or a literature class or a humanities course, something that effect. You really want to sort of use the cover letter as a way to flesh out your CV and sort of make your CV pop, because it's sort of hard to understand what people are doing simply based off of a title of a presentation or the title of a particular paper that you've gotten published. I mean, we could certainly look that information up, but on some level, looking at it from the perspective of the search committee, in many cases, we have like 300 resumes and packages to sort of go through. So if you can use the cover letter to your advantage and sort of help us sort of cut through all that information, I think you're doing better than a lot of other people are. In terms of getting letters out of your department chair people when you're going on the job market, you can certainly get those. But one thing that I think that you should use and can use are your observations from your department chair people. At Suffolk Community College, one of my primary functions is to observe full-time and part-time instructors. And there's a write-up that goes along with it, and it's a very detailed write-up, right? That write-up is housed in human resources at the college, but it's also yours to keep. And so one of the things that you can and should do when you go on the job market is to collect those things, especially if they're good observations, and be like, hey, guess what? This is who I am. This is my teaching philosophy. And I also have an observation from, chairperson X at this institution or chairperson Y at that institution. And I can provide you with that information. And those evaluations usually go through a variety of different topics, not just in terms of classroom management, but also in terms of syllabi formation. how well did the individual adhere to the learning outcomes of the course? How did they interact with the students? Things of that nature. So really sort of goes well beyond some of the things that would normally go in a letter of recommendation. So that's something important to sort of keep in mind, when you do go on the job market. And one thing that I would also keep in mind, and you really didn't ask this, but I think it's important to sort of put out there anyway. If you have the opportunity to go up for promotion as an adjunct, go up for promotion as an adjunct, because that demonstrates to future employers that you are engaged, you are interested, and they will hire you at that rank at a institution. So if you start off at Suffolk Community College, or any community college for that matter, as an adjunct instructor, you go up and you get adjunct assistant professor, well, guess what? You will be getting that rate and that title at that institution that you're applying for, right? That's usually par for the course. It's not always the case, but I would say like 9 times out of 10, that's usually how it goes. So you help yourself out immensely. I don't know if I answered all your questions, because there's a lot there, but I hope that I did.
I'll also just jump in to say that for some jobs, I had asked for letters from faculty from my dissertation committee, but I also asked for letters that started as teaching observations that were turned into like a teaching focused letter, both at Stony Brook and then also when I started adjuncting at Queens. And so if your concern is that you don't have a connection to faculty wherever you're adjuncting, you can still use a teaching letter from, say, Stony Brook, right? And that would still go a long way. So when I applied to my job at LaGuardia, I think I used like I used a letter from Celia, a letter from Lisa, and then a letter from a faculty member at Queens who had observed me. So, you can think about how tailoring, so to speak, also applies to which letters you choose to submit for which jobs. I definitely lost the thread of all of your questions and was kind of hoping that Liz was taking notes and could reiterate them, or someone else could.
Could I just pipe up and say something? I wanted to say, as a faculty member at Stony Brook, one of the things that I think is really important is that students ask their advisors to observe their teaching. I have had many students ask that, and Megan was one of them. And so when she applied for this job, I was able to write about her teaching in detail. I have had other students who do not ask it, and it goes by the wayside. And then later, I'll be writing letters to them and thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to, speak to this issue? So if this is not on your radar, it really should be. And, your advisor will be happy to watch you teach, but they are unlikely to remember that they should do it unless you ask them. So ask.
Can I just jump in there and say, Celia, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say the same thing. As the graduate program director, it's the job of the faculty who are working with you as your advisors. And I don't just mean your dissertation director, but I also mean your readers, right? The faculty readers on your committee. That is their job to observe your teaching and to write you strong letters of evaluation when you go on the market to find a job. So don't be shy to write to your committee members and to ask them to observe your teaching. In addition to reading your dissertation and giving you feedback on your research, they need to do that as well for your teaching. So again, I just want to second everything that Celia says.
And to sort of springboard off of that, I would also say that you should do these things as frequently and as early as possible. I don't know how far along everybody that's currently listening is in the process of earning their degree or where they're at in the job market, but the earlier you start and the more frequently you get the materials and send out job ads and start adjuncting, doing things like that, whatever you're capable of doing, the better it's going to be, and easier, because you're going to find that if you're late in the process and you get started late, you're going to feel like you're playing catch up to other candidates on the job market, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing things, that you're being ambitious and proactive earlier in your program as opposed to later.
I also remembered part of one of your other questions, which Michael spoke to briefly, but that was whether or not research is important. I just want to echo that you mentioned the California system. If you have an awareness of that particular system, then that's good, because I have heard that as well, that research is generally less important in the California community college system. But as far as I know, at least on the East Coast, it's still quite important. And within particular school systems, it might be more important, or particular campuses. So like on my campus, there was a push a number of years ago, I think before I was hired, to only, at least predominantly, unless there's a real excuse not to, only hire folks who already have a PhD or who are working towards a PhD. Whereas in the California system, I think you can be hired with a master's in some instances. Research is important on my campus. My provost does not give us like a specific number of articles that you need to hit in terms of a benchmark, but you do need to be publishing, you know, in order to go up for tenure, in order to go up for promotion. So it's important. I think in most jobs, you will get a question about the relationship between your teaching and your research. And some version of that probably needs to be in your cover letter as well, but really think about that relationship in real depth, and in terms of the kind of position to which you're applying. You'll prioritize sort of the way that works in one particular direction versus the other based on the job.
And just to piggyback on what Megan said, it's getting harder and harder to find generalist positions these days. When I first went on the job market, it was master's required. That's all that the job posting would say. It's like, you know, we're looking for this, we're looking for a generalist, master's required. And now it's, or like actually maybe like 10 years after that, it was, you know, master's required, PhD preferred. And now the vast majority of the full-time blurbs, at least coming out of a community college, are, you know, PhD preferred. But that being said, the PhD is not sort of your magic ticket in. It's important, but at the same time, is how can you translate that research into something that you can use inside the classroom? That's really what people are looking for. And I think that really takes true intelligence in order to sort of take a really large, complicated idea and boil it down so that anybody can understand what you're talking about, whether they are, you know, new green freshmen, or, you know, sophomores or juniors or seniors, wherever it is you happen to be sort of going. So that's something else to sort of keep in mind.
I have a kind of point of concern. I think this is something that's pretty important to bring up, and it actually something that I actually have a question about after my point of concern about that, which is that there are a lot of jobs that I've seen for community colleges that are PhD preferred or required, but I have seen some that don't indicate that. And for those jobs, it seems to me that the PhD can be not a disqualifying factor, but a point of like a red flag. And I think that, Michael, you brought up this earlier where you're saying, well, it's not necessarily that the PhD is a red flag itself. It's that if that PhD who's applying for the job emphasizes their research and not their teaching, that they're not really the candidate that the community college is looking for. So could you speak a little bit about that, Michael or Megan?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're looking for candidates who can teach. And you know, now, I mean, the generalist position is sort of harder to come by. Now we're looking for specific people, like we're looking for an Americanist, or we're looking for somebody who will teach British, or we're looking for Comp Ret and, you know, and something else. But that said, we're looking for teachers who can teach in such a way that they can sort of pull the students along, not just in that particular course, but maybe even pull them along into a course in the spring, right? So you start off in the fall, you sort of move to the spring, things of that nature. Sometimes you've got these great candidates who are, you know, they research well and they present at conferences, but they just can't teach. And that's one of the great things about getting your degree right now at Stony Brook, is you have all these wonderful resources in your advisors and the classes that you have the opportunity to sort of go out and get your feet wet in. Go out and get your feet wet in those things. You know, take Dr. Santa Anna's advice and Dr. Marshik's advice, and pull your colleagues in to help with the whole teaching aspect of it. because that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for good, smart people who can translate their research into something that people from a variety of different walks of life can get. That's really it.
And if you get asked during the interview questions that are specific to your teaching and you can't talk about your teaching and it diverts back to your research, that's when something becomes a red flag. If everything comes back to your research and you can't talk about your teaching on its own.
Well, I am noting the time, and my final question that I was going to ask, I think has organically kind of been tackled, which was a question about what are the kind of the challenges you're up against and what are the best parts. And I think both of those things really came shining through in the Q&A, especially kind of the most exciting and generative parts and the space for being really innovative in that work of translating our research into teaching and then kind of back again, right? So I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who made time to come out today. An absolutely ginormous thanks to Michael and Stephen and Megan for sharing time and space and all of their insights with us.
Once again, I do want to thank Michael, Megan, and Stephen. It was just such a pleasure to hear you guys talk. And, I know I've been seeing in the chat how helpful this advice has been. So thank you so much. I believe that's it. Thanks once again, everybody, for sharing some of your day-to-day with us. And thanks especially to our speakers.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.